I'm Nora Beaumont, 28, the middle child in a family that appears in glossy coffee table books about the Philadelphia Main Line. People assume that means certainty of address, of future, of who you're supposed to be. Certainty in our house came with a script Shipley Wharton Beaumont Holdings. It did not include the way my chest loosened the first time I watched a public defender argue to keep a woman in her apartment for another month. My father, Richard, chairs Beaumont Holdings, a real estate and infrastructure conglomerate, with its name printed on steel beams and charity programs alike. My mother, Victoria, inherited a lacquered sort of poise along with a portfolio. She edits our lives down to palatable anecdotes. My brother Edward was raised like a polished heirloom regatta's board seats a tailored smile. My sister Lila rebelled in pastel RISD instead of Wharton gallery work, instead of an analyst program, but always at the right openings with the right surname on the wall. I was the one who asked awkward questions why the endowment for the arts outpaced the fund for eviction defense, why we donated in plaques but gossiped about the recipients on the ride home. I followed the parts of the script they would tolerate. I went to Penn, but I slid into legal theory seminars, then nights at the courthouse observing arraignments. Arguments at home took on a choreography of their own. My father's fingertips tapped the edge of the mahogany as if keeping time for a verdict. My mother's voice acquired an extra thread of silk right before it cut. You've been given every instrument, she would say, smile undisturbed. Must you insist on playing out of tune? I took the LSAT, survived the marathon of law school, and last month I passed the bar. I didn't post a photo of my results. I called my mother from the sidewalk outside the library, the phone skidding against my palm because I was sweating. Could you include it in the family letter I asked the quarterly that floated into the mailboxes of Old City and Haverford, like an engraved calling card? There was a pause long enough for the rumble of a bus to pass. Darling, people pass exams every day, she said gently, which was how she always said the cutting things. Edward's engagement is the real headline. Edward was marrying Genevieve Carlisle, daughter of a family whose ships carry the steel my father builds with. The union looked like a merger. Even in the engagement photo, Edward's cufflink glint, Genevieve's slim wrist in a vintage bracelet, a skyline arranged obligingly behind them. I told myself the dinner would simply be about them. I told myself it would be fine. The Beaumont townhouse on Rittenhouse Square is limestone that insists it has always been there. 5 floors and a narrow elevator with brass that smells faintly of polish. Portraits of ancestors who look allergic to the common cold. I arrived with an old instinct to please still wired into my movements. I wore a navy dress my mother once called becoming, smoothed my hair into a low twist. She preferred to my unruly waves, and fastened my grandmother's tiny cameo locket. The one keepsake that felt like a private permission slip, Miss Nora. Mr. Avery said, opening the door with a kindness he didn't waste on many. He has been our butler since the year I learned to read menus with prices hidden. They're in the front drawing room. I heard laughter as we neared Edward's smooth tenor, my father's deeper baritone. The drawing room gleamed as if it had been waxed for the occasion. Edward stood near the mantel with his arm around Genevieve. She had the elegant, lightly studied ease of someone who had been taught how to stand in a dress that cost more than a reasonable rent. Pale blue satin pearls, the exact size to qualify as taste. Nora, my father said, checking the time on the face of a watch that had a waiting list, cutting it close. I'm 5 minutes early, I said. In our family, on time means the first person to arrive has already finished a drink. My mother air-kissed both my cheeks without risking her lipstick. If you'd let Stella take your hair this afternoon, we could have tamed the flyaways. Congratulations, I said to Genevieve and meant it. It's beautiful news. Thank you. She smiled with that careful kindness well-brought-up people learn. Edward says you're doing interesting work. Interesting is one of our family's synonyms for not serious. I didn't correct her. Dinner is served, Mr. Avery announced. We took our places. My father at the head, my mother opposite the couple together. Lila and I across. The first course was an oyster velouté, pale and precise in shallow bowls, the surface so glossy I could see a wavering reflection when I leaned forward. The flowers were white peonies from my mother's garden in Gladwin, the vase an heirloom from a great aunt who believed crystal could redeem almost anything. Tell Nora about the proposal my mother prompted, not looking at me as she did it, which is how she often made requests on my behalf. Edward obliged. After hours at the museum, he said, and of course it was the museum, the American wing, a quartet in the balcony. I'd arranged for her favorite painting to be the only one lit. Then the champagne. Which painting, I asked. Genevieve's eyes warmed. Sargent's portrait with the white dress. It felt like stepping into the canvas. It sounds carefully done, I said. My father was watching me not for pleasure, but for deviation. He wanted the moment my mouth ran ahead of my diplomacy. He wanted the offense that would justify the lecture he'd brought pre-written. The duck arrived with seared skin cherries glossed into obedience. Conversation slid into venues and numbers, how many guests which club would admit which list. I waited for a lull that did not belong to me and took it anyway. I passed the bar, I said, setting my glass down so I wouldn't have to hold on to anything. I wanted to say thank you for everything that got me there. Silence is heavier in a dining room like ours, padded by silken tradition. My mother lifted her wine and set it down again without drinking. My father carved with neat movements. Passing a test isn't the sort of accomplishment that needs a centerpiece, he said. Not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. But since you've brought it up, have you reconsidered our offer? In-house counsel is a dignified way to begin. I steadied my voice. I've accepted a position with the Delaware Valley Legal Collective. The what Edward said before he could help himself. A non-profit, I said. Tenants' rights, benefits, appeals, domestic violence protection orders. The things I care about doing. My father set his fork down with a click that made Mr. Avery glance over from the sideboard. You mean the clinic where you dabbled in law as a student, he said. A nice hobby. But a Beaumont doesn't make her living triaging other people's bad decisions. It's not a hobby. I said, heat rising in my neck. It's the law. Someone's paying rent in a car because a landlord changed the locks. Someone's terrified to go home tonight. This is exactly what my father said. What you went to an elite institution for. To help people who will drag our name into headlines the first time they decide to be ungrateful. Use your training where it matters. Protect our interests, Shaz. That is not an unreasonable request. Victoria lifted a hand palm down, smoothing the air. Richard, she murmured, then turned to me with that patient smile. No one is denying your heart. We all admire a season of altruism, but there are optics. There is timing. There's the reality that Edward's engagement puts our family under a certain lens. At what point do optics become the only thing I asked? My voice was steady now, which felt like luck. We write checks to shelters and then install marble sinks to look generous in photographs. Careful, my father said the word so soft it burned. You are speaking about how we have chosen to allocate the fruits of our work. I'm speaking about the gap between the way it looks and the way it is. Edward cleared his throat. Let's not turn tonight into what I asked him. An honest conversation. Lila's phone went dark under her hand. She was watching everyone the way she always did, collecting expressions for some private canvas. My mother tried again. We were lenient about the law school experiment. We supported it. But at some point, Nora, we stopped funding detours. It isn't a detour, it's the road. I drew a breath that tasted like cherries and restraint, and I can take care of myself. My father's attention sharpened, as if a small, invisible dial had been turned. On what income, he asked. You've enjoyed living in a world without invoices for a long time. The clinic can't pay your rent in a safe neighborhood unless you plan to crowdsource it with your friends from your seminars. I felt something tilt inside me, the familiar mixture of shame and fury, the way they conspire. It isn't your job to like my work, I said. It is enough that I do. He pushed his plate away. The room, obedient, seemed to get colder. Enough, he said. If you insist on making a spectacle of your contrariness, you can do it on your own ledger. Richard, my mother said that single syllable offered like a napkin of truce. He stood. He has never raised his voice to end a conversation. He lowers it the way a judge might lower a gavel that everyone already knows how to hear. Nora Elizabeth Beaumont, he said. He only uses my middle name to sign documents and deliver judgments. If this is your path, it is not ours. You will not trade on our name at the courthouse for a living that embarrasses this family. You will not dine here while you do it. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Edward stared hard at his knife. Lila's mouth parted and then shut. The peonies seemed suddenly too sweet, as if the room had been frosted for a cake we'd never eat. You can't be serious, I said, but my voice came out as something smaller. "Mr. Avery," my father said without looking at me. "Kindly see Miss Beaumont out. Her keys are on the table in the hall. She won't need the ones to this house." The soup spoons were lined up perfectly beside the empty bowls. The quartet in the balcony of Edward's story might as well have been playing down the hall. I kept my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. Mr. Avery's shoes sounded soft on the carpet as he approached. Mr. Avery's steps barely made a sound on the carpet, but I felt them as if they were marking time. He offered his arm the way he had when I was small and unsteady on patent leather shoes. I didn't take it. The hallway's runner smelled faintly of beeswax and lemon. On the console table lay a neat tray with keys arranged like punctuation. The set to the townhouse rested apart from mine, the metal winking under the chandelier, as if the distinction needed light to be believed. "Your coat!" "Miss Nora," Mr. Avery said. The gentleness in his voice scraped me raw. I slid into the wool and closed the buttons with fingers that didn't quite obey. Behind us, the dining room murmured, china lifted, someone breathing out the clink of a fork on porcelain. He opened the door. Rittenhouse Square's lamps painted the steps in coins of yellow. When the door shut, the latch settled with a practiced finality. The sound was smaller than it felt. I walked to the curb because walking was all there was to do. A car idled across the way. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing. I ordered a rideshare with hands that had finally decided to shake. My phone showed the car's slow approach like a tiny salvation. The driver didn't ask questions. I watched my face in the window glass and thought how strange it was to look the same when the floor plan of your life had been redrawn. The city slid by bakeries, dark a corner bar still lit the river beyond like a strip of slate. My apartment in Fittler Square had floor-to-ceiling windows that made the air feel expensive. I watched the elevator number tick up and breathed as if opening a door inside my ribs might let more oxygen in. The quiet in my apartment bordered on theatrical. A bouquet from last weekend, the sort of thing sent with an embossed card, and no message had collapsed in the vase, the petals going translucent. I toed off my heels and left them by the door like a pair of small defeats. When I tried to pour a glass of water, the stemware chimed against the sink, betraying my wrists. It took longer than it should have to open my banking app. Habit routed me through the familiar taps. Muscle memory believed in a different evening. The screen blinked like a stage cue. Checking zeron, savings tharon. The numbers felt theatrical too, as if someone had wiped a whiteboard cruelly clean. I laughed once, a sound too close to choking, and set the phone down because I didn't want to hurl it, just to have the only thing I owned that still functioned stop doing that. I didn't cry, not yet. I walked through the rooms and touched the backs of chairs, the edge of the counter, the spine of a book. I touched the cameo at my throat. It was a habit, the way some people touch a cross or a charm, a check, that I hadn't misplaced my permission to be myself. I unfastened it gently and laid it on the dresser. The absence felt like a small, deliberate wound. At 11:14, Lila texted, "Are you home?" "Yes." "Then I hate them." "Don't." I typed and stared at the word until the screen dimmed. I thumbed the text back to life and added, "Not helpful." "I'm okay." 3 dots pulsed. They vanished, came back. "I can spot you a little until you figure it out," she wrote. "Not much." I told her I loved her and put the phone face down so I didn't have to watch any more dots decide whether to become sentences. Sleep required a kind of surrender I didn't have. I lay on the couch and watched the city through glass until the sky pulled itself lighter. In the morning, an email from the property manager waited. Subject line, "Guarantor change." The body was polite to a fault. "We have been notified by Mr. Beaumont's office that the guarantee on your lease will be terminated at the end of the month. Kindly provide a replacement guarantor or vacate by that date." The paragraph congratulated me on the swift transition as if I'd been promoted. I wrote to the clinic asking if onboarding could move sooner, the administrator kind, in a way that made my throat sting. Apologized, grants timing the calendar that money keeps. I called the credit card company because denial likes paperwork. Declined transactions don't change their mind because you let them hold. By noon, I'd placed a floor lamp and a pair of bar stools on a resale app with photographs that pretended we were all just redecorating for fun. Kaya called at 2. We'd studied together for the bar in a failed attempt to tame anxiety with flashcards. "Come stay with me and Mina," she said, not offering the dignity of asking first. "The couch is decent." "I'm not." "But the couch is." "I can't pay you yet," I said. "Then bring groceries when you can," she answered. "And the good coffee when you can't." I packed badly as people do when their instincts are competing. I folded sweaters as if the neatness could persuade time to go backward. I wrapped a drinking glass in tissue paper as if I were the one paying for the box. I left the Cameo on the dresser and then went back for it because some things demand to be the last you put away. Kaya's apartment in Queen Village had a slope to it that felt like a shrug. The sofa was flowered, the kind that had been loved by another life before this one. We ate pasta with a sauce that tasted like garlic and mercy. Mina handed me a blanket without saying I'm sorry, and I loved her for the omission. The days after that wore a uniform I hadn't chosen. Lists calls the slow attrition of possessions into cash. I stood in front of a short, tired man at a pawnshop on South Street and unclasped my grandmother's Cameo. "It's Victorian," he said, taking a loop to the tiny profile. "Not rare, but the setting is good." He quoted a number that made mathematical sense, an emotional none. "I'll give you a ticket. 90 days you can buy it back." He slid the receipt toward me like a lifeline he had cut into pieces. I learned the hours when the Free Library's branches were warm and bright and anonymous. I learned to work from a table near an outlet and not feel I owed anyone a latte I couldn't buy. I learned that on Tuesdays, the farmer's market near Headhouse Square discounts whatever can't survive another day of display. There was relief in doing the math and making it come out to enough. I registered with a doc review company because cash is not insulted by your degrees. The tasks slid over my mind like static, but they paid, and that became a hymn all its own. At night, I listened to the corridors quiet to Mina's late calls with a client in a different time zone to someone's upstairs toddler negotiating bedtime as if it were a labor contract. The ordinary became everywhere, and I tried to let it into me. On the 5th day, an email slipped into my inbox with the entitled column of messages from attorneys. From Arthur Keene. Subject: Urgent Trust Administration Inquiry. The body contained 2 sentences and a signature block with more serif than I trusted. Ms. Beaumont, a matter concerning a trust established in your name requires prompt discussion. Please call my office at your earliest convenience. Keene and Daugherty had been on envelopes in my childhood as often as holiday stamps. Arthur had white hair and the posture of a man who believed in straight lines. I stared at the screen until the new message notification stopped blinking. Kaya peered over her mug. "Spam?" she asked. "Worse," I said. And yet she said, handing me the phone as if it weighed something she could take from me. Keene and Daugherty, the receptionist, trilled when I called. "How may I direct your—" "This is Nora Beaumont," I said. "For Mr. Keene." There was a pause, and the sound of a hand over a receiver, a quick confer, as if my name had grown a second spine overnight. "Hold, please. Nora." Arthur's voice entered the line as if he'd been standing beside it. "Thank you for calling. I was concerned you might not." "I considered not," I said. "What do you want?" "I'd prefer we speak in person," he said, sounding more tired than I remembered he could. "Some matters are better kept off email." "I'm not coming to your office." "Of course, somewhere neutral." He hesitated. "La Colombe on 19th tomorrow at 10. Kaya mouthed, "Say yes." I did. The morning was stern and bright. I borrowed Mina's scarf and pretended it belonged to me, the way people pretend chairs in a waiting room are theirs for an hour. La Colombe smelled like a decision you could alter by ordering differently. Arthur was early, a stack of folders at his elbow, his tie slightly askew in a way I hadn't seen before. He stood and shook my hand as if we were both balancing on something narrow. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be brief. Your grandmother Evelyn Hartley established trusts for each of her grandchildren. Your brother's vested at 25. Your sister's is scheduled for next year. Yours was conditioned differently. My parents told me it was a small education fund," I said, and watched his eyes as if truth might live in the pupils. He flinched at that, not guilt, more like professional pain. "It was not small, and it was not consumable at the discretion of your parents. Your grandmother specified that your trust would transfer to your control upon completion of graduate education, or your 30th birthday, whichever came first. The funds are restricted to education and housing." How much? I said. I didn't ask if. Numbers would be a language we could both speak without decoration. As of last quarter, he said opening a folder 2.2 million. I sat back. The cafe chattered on the machine, hissing like a pleasant argument. And my parents have served as trustees until distribution, he said. In that role, they were bound by fiduciary duties. Those duties include prudence, loyalty, and obedience to the trust instrument. He placed photocopies on the table the way a magician might lay down cards before admitting there's no trick. I discovered lines of credit taken with your trust corpus as collateral for business purposes. That is explicitly barred by your grandmother's language. My breath found a new rhythm, faster, smaller. So the money's gone. No, he said quickly. Not gone. Exposed. Leveraged. The assets remain, but the risk and the use do not conform to the instrument. When you passed the bar, distribution should have been immediate, and it wasn't. He met my gaze. Your father asked me to delay. He raised questions about the meaning of completion. I advised that his interpretation was unlikely to stand. He sat straighter, a man reminding himself of what he is. I cannot permit continued non-compliance. I need your authorization to initiate transfer. You will also, in my professional opinion, need independent counsel. Not yours, I said. Not mine, he agreed. I have a duty to the instrument and to the role I serve. You need someone whose duty is singularly to you. We sat with that. The noise of cups, the scrape of chairs, the caffeinated laughter, all of it went on. Arthur slid another document toward me, an inventory, a calendar of transactions, footnotes, where the language of one world tried to translate the language of another. My grandmother, I said, and disliked how breakable my voice sounded. Why did she write mine differently? He glanced down, then back at me. She told me you were the one most in need of room. The words rearranged something quiet behind my ribs. He closed the folder as if he'd seen it happen and wanted to be respectful. I know this is a great deal at once, he said, but delay serves no one now. Outside, the air had the kind of chill that sanity enjoys. I stepped onto 19th Street, holding the packet as if it might tip and spill. Traffic hummed. A delivery truck beeped as it reversed. I stood there until my breath stopped reminding me I was counting it. Then I walked. I walked past Taylor's and a florist, past a man arguing tenderly with a beagle, past a shop window where a dress reflected back a life I didn't want anymore. Back at Kaya's, I sprayed the documents on the table, the way people spread maps before they admit they're lost. She read silently, her finger tracking a line as if the text might slip. So you're not broke, she said finally. I am and I'm not, I answered, and neither thing undoes the other. We didn't talk about plans. We talked about what the words meant, about the difference between owning something and being able to touch it. Later, after Mina came home and added her silence like a thoughtful weight to the room, I took out the pawn ticket and slid it under the corner of Arthur's inventory. It was a small act without ceremony. It steadied me anyway. Night arrived early and uninvited. The city lit itself out of habit. I sat at Kaya's table with a pen that wasn't mine and wrote my full name as a signature in a blank space where it was asked for. The ink looked like anyone's. The stroke of the final letter was the only thing in the room that felt undeniably like me. Arthur filed the transfer papers as if he were moving a piano, slow enough not to scuff the floor, quick enough to prove it could be done. The email confirmations arrived with timestamps and docket numbers that felt like coordinates. By afternoon, my phone lit with a number I knew by muscle memory, my mother's assistant. Ms. Beaumont, she said, voice shaped to sound like no one's fault. Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont would like to resolve matters privately. Mr. Keene can host a meeting tomorrow. 2:00. Tell them I'll be there, I said, and after the pause that followed, added with counsel. Finding counsel took one call. Professor Lerman picked up on the first ring, though he never did. You need a knife, not a spoon, he said, and gave me a name. She's relentless, which in this context is a synonym for kind. Carmen Soto met me in a glass cube of an office near City Hall that had a view of a clock face and nothing sentimental inside. She read Arthur's packet and the trust instrument as if they were written on glass, and she could see the machinery beneath. Straightforward, she said at last. Your grandmother anticipated precisely this kind of mischief. The language is good, the trustee's conduct is not. I keep wanting it not to be a fight, I said, and surprised myself by hearing exhaustion instead of virtue in the sentence. We won't throw a punish first, she said, but we will not flinch. You authorized me to speak on your behalf.
Yes.
And you do not sign anything they hand you without me reading it ever.
Ever, I echoed.
We spent an hour preparing for a meeting that would pretend to be polite. Carmen taught me the phrases that close doors without slamming them. That doesn't work for me. Let's stay with the instrument. We'll take that under advisement. She slid a slim folder toward me at the end. Letters of intent already drafted a petition to the Orphans' Court, half-complete a complaint with paragraphs left to fill with dates and citation. Not threats, she said, tapping the stack, just contingencies. I slept for 3 hours that night and dreamed of a house with too many locked doors and one window that kept widening until it became a street. Keene and Daugherty's conference room had the kind of view that makes people say the word perch. Walnut table, the city laid out like a map someone expensive had folded. On the credenza sat a carafe of water and a dish of lemon slices that looked like evidence of care. Arthur was at the head, 2 folders aligned like bookends in front of him. When my parents entered a minute later, the air made a sound I felt in my molars. My father's suit was sober navy. His expression had misplaced the word. My mother wore winter white and pearls, the exact shade of restraint. They looked like a portrait of composure, like people who return library books early. Their surprise lasted until they saw Carmen. "This is my mother," began. "My attorney," I said. "Carmen Soto. We needn't involve my father started." "We will," Carmen said, smiling, as if she were declining dessert. We sat. Arthur cleared his throat. "The instrument is clear. Ms. Beaumont's degree was conferred. Distribution is due. We can effect transfer this week." "I appreciate your diligence," Arthur, my father said. "But there's a larger conversation to be had. Family enterprises require coherence. Nora's trust was always intended to integrate with the broader Hartley Beaumont legacy. We've prepared a structure that honors everyone's interests." He nodded, and his corporate counsel, whom I hadn't noticed in the corner because he had perfected the art of being furniture, rose and slid a document across the table. Carmen didn't touch it. She tilted it toward me with one finger, as if the paper carried heat. The first page was titled, "Family Alignment Agreement." In the soft legal undergrowth that followed the words transfer, assign, and irrevocable, bloomed in careful rows. There was an advisory subcommittee where my parents and the corporate council would sit forever. There was an annual distribution just generous enough to be called gracious. There was no control. "No," I said. My mother's lips parted in a small rehearsal of hurt. "Darling, you haven't even—" "I've read enough." I looked at Carmen. "You—" "Enough," she said. My father folded his hands, making a steeple of his fingers, the way he does when the verdict has allegedly already been written. "No one is taking anything from you," he said. "We're protecting your interests. The assets will be better stewarded within the family's investment architecture. You'll have more than you can spend and freedom from administrative burden." "Stewardship," Carmen said lightly, "isn't a synonym for possession, and fiduciary isn't an adjective you wear when it matches your tie." He turned to her. "Ms. Soto, with respect, this is a family matter." "With respect," she said, "this is a trust. The family happens elsewhere." Arthur slid a second set of papers forward. "Here are the bank instructions for transfer into an account in Ms. Beaumont's sole name," he said. "We will need signatures acknowledging receipt of the trustee's report for the last fiscal year." "Report," Carmen repeated. "Let's see it." My father's gaze flicked to the corporate counsel. "There are drafts. Produce the final or we'll request it from the court," Carmen said, still pleasant. "And while we're at it, we'll take the minutes of any meeting at which lines of credit were approved against the corpus, the correspondence with the bank, and the list of interested parties." "You're making this adversarial," my father said, and for the first time I heard strain enter the room like wind under a door. "No," Carmen said, "the conduct was adversarial. We're making a record." My mother angled toward me, lowering her voice the way you do when you intend to look merciful, even while you cut. "We've all said regrettable things in the last week," she began. "Your father spoke in anger. It's natural. Edward's engagement puts us in a particular spotlight. If you accept a structure that shows unity, we can put this ugliness behind us." "Behind whom?" I asked. "Behind everyone," she said quickly, as if beating me to the word would make it generous. Carmen placed her pen on the table parallel to its edge. "Mrs. Beaumont, no structure that strips my client of control over her own property will be acceptable. Transfer is non-negotiable. We can address any questions about accounting in an orderly way, but we don't trade rights for invitations." My father leaned back. The disappointment in his face wasn't feigned. It never is. It is his truest religion. You realize he said to me that by escalating this, you make certain things impossible. The legal community in this city is small. I sit on boards. I chair committees. It would be naive to assume that takes place in a vacuum. I felt the old reflex duck apologize, call what you are a phase. It rose and met something else, something with edges. If you're threatening my job, I said, do it without furniture words. He flushed. I'm telling you how this world works. The Orphans Court has its own world, Carmen said. So does the Attorney General's Charitable Trust section. So does the press, if we go there, though. I would prefer not to. Transparency is not a threat. It's a disinfectant. You know this. My mother's voice thinned. We will not be held hostage by a child who doesn't understand what she's been given. Carmen turned her head as if considering an art object. She understands exactly what she's been given, she said, and she understands who gave it. The door opened. Edward stepped in late on purpose, the way winners in the family lore always are. Lila slipped in behind him and stayed close to the jam as if the wood could think for her. Good, my father said to Edward, relief trimmed into the syllable. Perhaps you can inject some reason. We're here to support a resolution, Edward said, and executed a small frown that in our family counts as diplomacy. Nora, you're turning a miscommunication into litigation. This isn't necessary. I looked at him. We used to share a bassinet, and then a backyard, and then a school bus. He taught me to tie a bowline. Is it a miscommunication, I asked, when the words are written down and the numbers have dates beside them? Do you have to say it like that? He asked, frustration catching on the civility. Do you have to make it sound like an indictment? It is an indictment, Lila murmured, then closed her mouth as if she'd startled herself. My mother's eyes flicked toward her. The flick was both censure and inventory. Lila, darling. Don't, Lila said to her, quiet but whole. She looked at me. I'm just saying what the paper says. Enough. My father said not loud. His quiet is a room the doors shut off. Here are the choices, sign the alignment agreement and be part of this family's future, or drag us through a court for the pleasure of strangers and see yourself cut off from more than dinner. This is the last time I will offer the generous option. Carmen didn't touch my arm. She didn't have to. I could feel the counsel in her stillness. Choose in your own voice. I stared at the lemons sweating gently in their dish and thought of a market stall where the vendor had palmed me 2 overripe pears for free. I thought of the cameo's tiny profile of the pawn ticket creased into my pocket like a breathing thing. I thought of a woman at intake describing a landlord who had changed the lock while she took her daughter to an exam. No, I said again, and this time the word landed where I put it. I won't sign away control of what is mine. Transfer the trust. Provide the reports. We'll address the accounting through the appropriate channels. Edward exhaled the way people do when they expect you to come to your senses and you do not. You're making a mistake you can't walk back, he said. Then I'll stand where I am, I said. My father stood too, all polished wooden verdict. Without us, he said, you will learn what the world costs. I've been learning, I said. I slipped the pawn ticket from my pocket and laid it on the table, a small scrap next to all that linen. I know the price of some things now, and I know the value of others. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Arthur, who had spent his career arranging words where they belonged, reached for the bank instructions. We have what we need to proceed, he said. My mother looked at him as if he had betrayed the weather. Arthur, Victoria, he said softly, the instrument governs. Something in my father's face loosened and then hardened. You are no longer welcome in our home, he said to me, as if the first exile had been a rehearsal and this was the performance. You will not bring shame under that roof. Lila made a sound small and furious. Edward put a hand out either to stop her or help himself balance. Carmen gathered our papers with the same care she had unstacked them. I took the pawn ticket back and slid it into my pocket. Its edges had learned the shape of my hand. In the elevator, Carmen pressed the button and stared at the closed doors as if they were behaving well for once. You did exactly what you needed to do, she said, and it wasn't comfort. It was a fact she was willing to sign her name to. My chest felt both empty and correctly sized. I thought I would shake. You did the shaking already, she said. Now you're just standing. On the sidewalk, winter light made even the glass buildings look honest. We walked until we reached the corner where the traffic blessedly refused to care. A delivery bike cut too close, and I stepped back, bumping my shoulder against Carmen's. She steadied me with a palm that said nothing ceremonial. Go home to your friends, she said. I'll email you the transfer confirmation. We'll take the rest in sequence. Kaya wasn't home yet when I reached the apartment, so the rooms received me without having to explain themselves. I set the folder on the table and the ticket beside it and stared until the two things blurred. Then I took out a sheet of paper that wasn't legal anything and wrote down 6 names. People I'd met at intake, on trains, at the library, in the clinic waiting room. I didn't write what they needed. I already knew. When Kaya came in, her cheeks were cold and her smile a question. I didn't make a speech. I lifted the pawn ticket between 2 fingers and said soon. She grinned and went to find 3 mugs. Later, when the streetlights had given the block their shallow moons and Mina's door had clicked shut, I took the cameo's absence out of its word and let it sit in the air. My phone buzzed, and when still a text from an unknown number that resolved into my mother's. We hope you'll reconsider. We love you. I turned the phone over, the way you turn a photograph face down too late to keep it from becoming a story. On the table, Arthur's inventory caught a slice of light and shone. I read the lines again, the dates my grandmother's careful hand had put to work living past herself, the clauses that named me as someone to be trusted with her intention. I signed where Carmen had left a flag and stacked the papers in a neat square that could bear the weight of a glass. When I finally slept, I dreamed of a window that was just a window, and a door I could open with my own key. By mid-morning, the email from Carmen arrived. Transfer confirmed in a subject line that looked like a door unlatching. A second message from Arthur followed accounting attachments, a clipped note about next steps, his initials like 2 neat hinges. I opened my banking app and saw numbers that didn't rewrite who I was, so much as remove the hand from my throat. The relief was immediate and then complicated. Carmen called. Breathe, she said, then go slow. Separate accounts. A fee-only advisor. No heroics today. I wasn't planning any. I said, though returning the cameo to my throat felt like one. I bought back the cameo that afternoon. The pawn shop's bell sounded the same, a tinny punctuation. The clerk didn't ask questions. He slid the box across the glass with the exact care I'd imagined for weeks. When the clasp clicked shut behind my neck, I felt less like I'd retrieved jewelry and more like I'd returned a sentence to its grammar. I signed for a small, light-soaked 1-bedroom above a bakery on a block that smelled like mornings. The floors tilted a little. The windows rattled when buses sighed past. I paid in full and then stopped palms flat on the kitchen counter, getting used to the silence of owing no one for the roof over my head. Kaya and Mina helped carry boxes up narrow stairs, laughing when the dresser wedged on the landing like an argument, and then gave way. We furnished with patience and the kind of thrift that makes objects tell you who they were before. I hung a print by a neighborhood artist over the table. It was a window full of sky you could mistake for a real one if you were tired. Work began with a key card and a stack of files whose corners had already learned about hope. Intake voices braided together in my head, evictions disguised as renovations benefits, lost in translation bruises that looked like maps. The collective ran on fluorescent light and coffee that apologized by being hot. We made forms, sing emergency motions orders to show cause letters that said, I see you, to people who had not been seen in writing before. 3 weeks in, I stood beside a client on a cracked linoleum floor while a judge told a landlord to replace a lock he had no right to change. The judge spoke in the cautious sentences of law. My client exhaled in a language older than that. Outside the courtroom, a reporter asked for a quote. I said nothing that would look good in print and everything I could bear to say. 2 days later, a small article ran with a photograph of me that captured the exact second before I blinked. My mother texted, "Please try to be discreet about the family name." There was no congratulations attached to the caution. I put the phone down and returned to a file where a woman had listed the items she needed from a house she could not enter. 2 uniforms, 1 inhaler, a drawing her child made of a tree. In April, Lila came to see my new place carrying a bouquet of something that looked like a joke, until it didn't, tall stems drooping happily in a thrifted jar. I like your windows, she said, sitting cross-legged on my rug. They don't pretend to be bigger than they are. We ate ramen at the table with the sky print and talked about the kind of money that makes people choose badly and then insist it was the only choice. She asked for Carmen's number. Next year, she said eyes on her bowl. My trust. I don't want to argue. I just don't want anyone to assume. Carmen doesn't argue first, I said. She writes. At the statewide legal aid fundraiser in June, the napkins were still cloth, but the speeches were shorter. I wore a dress that understood the word enough, and the cameo like a quiet appointment. A retired judge told the room stories about rights you only notice when they disappear. I felt my parents before I saw them, an adjustment in the air, a perfume that tugged the past by the wrist. My mother kissed the air near my face, as if the last year had not learned to count. My father's smile was small and serviceable. We read the article, he said, managing to make the word article sound like a garden tool. Be careful about antagonizing developers. Memory is long in this town. So, I'm careful with people, I said. Before he could answer, a young attorney with a badge askew stopped to thank me for a motion template we'd circulated. We used it in Allentown, he said, breathless. The TRO came through in an hour. He moved on, leaving a wake of earnestness and a ribbon pinned crookedly to his lapel. My mother's hand found my father's sleeve. We should say hello to the donors, she murmured. When they left, the space they'd occupied kept their outline for a moment, and then didn't. I stood with a paper cup of coffee and watched a volunteer refill the lemon water slices drifting like small suns. Carmen found me in the corner and asked if I'd eaten anything, as if that were a legal requirement. One shrimp, I said. It was persuasive. By late summer, the bakery downstairs began selling loaves with sesame seeds like constellations. On Saturdays, I shopped the farmer's market and learned the names of cheeses. One warm morning, my parents appeared near the mushrooms, immaculate against a background of messy abundance. My father's face was paler than I remembered. A tremor stitched his hand to the paper bag. My mother held herself as if her spine had signed a contract. Marie, she almost said, catching the wrong name before it moved past her teeth. Nora. Hello, I said. We stood there, 3 people next to a table of nectarines pretending to be citizens. Your father's doctor recommends more fresh produce, my mother said. Like a woman making conversation about weather she did not approve of. You okay? I asked my father. It's nothing. He said. His voice had misplaced a layer of varnish and sounded more like wood. Minor. We took our coffee to a bench. People moved around us carrying peonies and baguettes and toddlers who refused to be carried. My father watched a child in a Superman t-shirt negotiate for a cookie with the craft of a small diplomat. You seem... well, he said, as if he were approaching a skittish animal. Settled. I am, I said. There was a silence with shape to it. My mother broke it carefully. We saw the profile in Philadelphia Magazine, she said. Community advocates. The way she pronounced the last word put the emphasis on community, as if the advocacy might take care of itself. It was small, I said. Still, my father said. He cleared his throat, glanced at his hands, then at me. Your grandmother had a way of anticipating the places we refused to look. This legal architecture. It was hers. You've handled it. I didn't rescue him from the sentence. He finished it anyway. She would be pleased. I nodded once. The coffee scalded a stripe across my tongue. The pain felt clean. An invitation to the Beaumont Easter brunch arrived with a handwritten note. Families should be together for holidays. I set it under a magnet and let it occupy the refrigerator like an exhibit. When the day came, I filled trays at a community meal instead, shoulder to shoulder with Kaya and a man named Lou who told jokes in a rhythm that made the line move faster. In the late afternoon, I walked home through blocks that had learned my errands and found a potted basil plant left at my door with a note from the bakery downstairs. For the sauce you make that smells like Sundays. In September, I filed paperwork to see the Evelyn Hartley Fellowship, a modest stipend for law students who chose summer work that didn't pay in rent. The form asked for a mission statement. I wrote 12 words that said what I meant, and then cut 4 that apologized. The first fellow sat across from me in the clinic lobby a month later. Notebook open, questions bright and restless. Her hunger for the work made the desk look less like furniture and more like a starting block. Autumn slid into the city like a hand into a familiar coat. I learned to sleep through the delivery truck that double-parked at dawn. I learned which stairs creaked and which ones lied. I learned that a key only matters if you decide which doors you want. Lila and I met every few weeks for pho or dumplings. She told me she'd begun drawing people on trains without their permission and then showing them the sketches anyway. Some look angry, she said. Most say thank you. A week before the year turned, an invitation arrived for a board reception I used to attend as a daughter, and now attended as an afterthought. I went because the collective needed friends with wardrobes and checkbooks, and because saying no all the time isn't the same as living. My parents were there, of course. My father looked tired in a way that acknowledged action had joined the word. We spoke briefly about a building he was selling. He did not ask me to fix anything. I did not offer. On my walk home, the air found that edge where breath shows. I climbed the stairs, set down my bag, and stood at the window with the city unrolling like a certainty I didn't have to sign. The cameo was cool against my skin. The keys on the hook by the door chimed against one another when the heater kicked on a small domestic bell. I took one down and turned it in my palm, the weight exactly what it was, no more, no less. Then I crossed the room and locked the door. I could open when I chose. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.